Everybody, please join me in thanking Mike Lake, Dan Spies, Barry, and all the folks at Northeastern and City So it's an absolute honor for me to be here among so many distinguished, like-minded professionals who are all here because we share a common purpose, and that is to invigorate an ecosystem that allows entrepreneurs to thrive in the greater Boston region. What's even more exciting, though, is that we all come from very different disciplines, because I believe that it's at the intersection of our worlds where the most imaginative ideas will materialize and have the better chance of getting implemented. Now, in my role at the Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, we're an innovation catalyst for Fidelity Investments. And what we do is we explore emerging trends in business and technology. We incubate some of the most promising ideas in our labs, and then we apply the very best ideas on behalf of our company and our customers. And we're fascinated by startups, and we look at them nationally and internationally for lots of reasons. One, the creativity that comes out of the startup community reveals deep insights around what the next big thing could be. Their success indicates where new value is being generated. And the networks that startups influence are collectively shaping our future. So at the heart of every startup story is a pioneer who's on a journey. And our conversation this morning is to talk about what can a city do to lower the barriers for that pioneer to get their passion activated and to turn what they love to do into a viable business. So we have a fantastic panel here. And we're going to hear from everyone for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for you to add your conversation, your voice to the dialogue. So first, at the foundation of an ecosystem is a connected community. Dan Eisenberg from Babson Global will tell us how. He's the professor of management practice where he established the Babson Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Project, BEEP, to help society, okay, don't beat that one out, that was actually real, to help societies around the world create the policies, structures, programs, and culture that foster entrepreneurship. Now, as we've seen, strong industry clusters are also important because they attract the best and brightest. Well, how does a cluster continue to reinvent itself? And what can a cluster do to help foster some of the very best ideas that are coming out of their universe for the world? Dr. Susan Wyndham-Bannister has some fabulous ideas, and she'll tell us how their portfolio of investments in the life sciences cluster is yielding tremendous outcomes. She's the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center, where some of the most important discoveries are taking place and truly putting Boston on the map. Now, it's not just about what we do, it's also about where we work. Our workspaces need to support the creative energy, right, that brings people together from many different disciplines. And no one knows that better than Tim Rowe. He's the founder and CEO of the Cambridge Innovation Center, which houses the densest collection of startups anywhere in the world. And according to the Boston Globe, the CIC may just be the most important building in Greater Boston. So, in Massachusetts, okay. Yeah, that Boston-Cambridge thing. I haven't decided yet if we're going to talk about that on stage.
The world.
The world. So how many are there now, Tim?
We're at 350 companies today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so then, of course, universities are absolutely fundamental and vital to not only educate the next generation of innovators, but they can act as a convening power to bring people together from all walks of life for a continuous learning to turn their ideas into reality. So we're delighted to have Patty Green here. She's the President's Distinguished Professor in Entrepreneurship at Babson College, where she formerly served as Provost and Dean of the Undergraduate School. And her current project is to lead the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Initiative in the United States and to advise the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women Initiative around the world. So I'm looking forward to an unbelievable session because one of the most profound lessons that I took away from our trip to Israel is not only can innovation shape a city, it can build a nation. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our panelists, and Dan Eisenberg will kick us off.
I've never ever given a lecture standing still before in my life, but because I found out that this, well, they turned it off. I can now move, because there was feedback. That's good. So yes, I have created something called the Babson Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Project, BEEP. I like short acronyms. BEEP is shorter than tweet. And I think you should turn the Cambridge Innovation Center into KIC.
Sick.
I didn't say that. Is there a way to turn on the projector, or do I do that from here?
I'll go find out.
Is there an answer? I'm gonna just try talking again and see what happens.
Yeah, searching. There we go.
Great. This is technology. This doesn't come off of my minutes. So I'm obliged, because I'm part of salesman, to give at least one advertisement. That is our Facebook page, entrepreneurial.revolution, and that is my email address. And I want to give a few caveats. What BEEP does, what I do in BEEP, is travel around the world creating projects to actually create more entrepreneurship. Not tell people how to do it, not advise them. Oh, thank you. This is a full service moderator. I have this, can you stand behind me? I just This is great. Now I know why I came. And we actually try to create more entrepreneurship sustainably in various cities and countries around the world in ways that we can actually measure the results. Along the way in this I've only been doing this a year and a half, but along the way in the project I discovered the power of cities, which led me to discover, I forget who discovered who first, Mike Lake. Where are you, Mike Lake? He disappeared. He knows that I'm talking, he leaves the room. Right. So I wanted to thank Mike and also express my admiration for what he and everyone else that's related to the project are doing. I really do believe in cities, and I've been trying to help connect the group to other cities around the world that fit his criteria. And thanks for inviting. I do have, by the way, before I forget, a few copies of some things. There's a Harvard Business Review article that came out a half year ago that I write called How to Start an Entrepreneurial Revolution. There's some few free copies there, and some other. I do blogging for The Economist and the Forbes and for the Huffington Post and all those other HBR, and so there's some things there as well. And by the way, those of you who may have, just by coincidence or out of sheer boredom, found out that I wrote a blog on Israel in the piece in Israel on Israel in The Economist last week. You'll also see that I lived there for 22 years, and I'd actually rather be on the next panel, because that's something I really do know something about. So, sorry? Okay, fine. That's why you said sick. I know. I can understand. Okay. I have three things to say in my 10 minutes. One has to do with the distinction between innovation and entrepreneurship. The second has to do with what entrepreneurship gets you as a society. And the third has to do with defining what the entrepreneurship ecosystem is. And all of those as hopefully backdrops to the conversation that we can all have together, because I would really prefer this to be as interactive as possible. I think that's true for all of us. So first of all, about innovation and entrepreneurship. They're not the same. Although they're in people's minds, in the public mind, in policymakers' minds, in a lot of your minds, and they are equivocal, and they're not. If you actually Google the two together, you'll find something between 60 and 100 million hits in 0.03 seconds of those two terms occurring together. And I'll give some examples of what I mean. First of all, innovation is usually, no matter what people say, innovation is almost always associated with science and technology. And people will tell you, no, it's business innovation and service and business model innovation, but when societies measure it, they measure usually two kinds of things. One of them has to do with education and how much is invested in education of science, math, and engineering, and the outcomes of that in terms of test scores. And the second has to do with science or research and how much is invested in science and what are the outcomes of that in terms of citations and intellectual property and other kinds of things related to that. And those are by far 90+++%. So innovation is in effect, de facto, about technology and science. I don't know if it should be, I don't think it should be, but it is in people's minds as well. So just to make some distinctions here, so entrepreneurship is not innovation, innovation is not just technology. Example, generic pharmaceuticals. That's an example of a field that has tremendous amounts of entrepreneurship in it. It's been changing how healthcare practice is conducted and delivered around the world. But generic pharmaceuticals have absolutely no innovation in them whatsoever. In fact, it's the opposite. Innovation has been defined out of generic pharmaceuticals. But try to tell someone in Iceland, for example, where the fourth largest generic company in the world is based, and they went from 0 to number 4 in the world in the space of 9 years, a company called Actavis. They try to tell them there's no entrepreneurship in that, and they won't believe you. A second example of the difference between innovation and entrepreneurship occurred just this week. I was at the White House for the launch of Startup America with John Arthorne of Mass Challenge, who's going to get on the stage later on today. But you got great press at that. That was wonderful. Mass Challenge is you'll hear more. I'm sure you know about it. If you don't, you'll hear more about it. But it's fantastic on a number of different dimensions. But, and this whole initiative was launched by the Office of Science and Technology Policy within the White House, and it was all about innovation in science and the President's State of the Union address. And lo and behold, the person who opened this launch was an 18-year-old girl and it was extremely impressive. Go to YouTube and see, her name is Zoe, who was homeless and ended up taking a course in high school offered by NIFTY, the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship. It changed her life. At the age of 14, she set up a company, and she has incredible poise, and if she doesn't want to be an entrepreneur, she can be the next Oprah easily, hands down, right, John? Just amazing. So it's worth it, and she's very, very pretty, too. And she's only 18, like she's has a Fulbright at Northwestern. What a story. But her business is about making dresses, making wedding dresses. Lots of entrepreneurship there, no innovation at all. Those of you who've been to Hong Kong and Singapore, I like to call it the tale of two cities. Those of you who haven't been won't understand this example, but Singapore is a place where there's lots of innovation and lots of technology, but no entrepreneurship at all. Hong Kong, it's the other way around. They have 4 times the patenting activity of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is medium on innovation, but on entrepreneurship, they're leading the way. And then a fourth example of the difference is a place where I grew up. I grew up not far from here in a little town called Woods Hole, Massachusetts. So if you haven't been to Hong Kong or Singapore, you've probably been to Woods Hole, because that's the place that if you blink an eye, you'll miss on the way to the ferry to go to the vineyard. But Woods Hole has the highest concentration. We're going to have Tim has more pounds of entrepreneur per square foot in Cambridge. Woods Hole has more pounds of Nobel laureates per square whatever in the world. And it's an incredible repository of knowledge and intellectual property and brain power. It's amazing. And there's only 954 full-time residents, which I am proud to be one. I bring all the averages down. But it's a place where there's tremendous amounts of innovation, and there's been in the history of, for example, the Marine Biological Laboratory since it was founded in 1888, there's been one company that was created out of all those institutions combined. There are 5 institutions. So that's the first. So I think the takeaway there is you have to be really clear about what you're talking about and what you want. Do you want entrepreneurship or do you want innovation? And they're not the same. They do oftentimes go together, and especially in a place like Boston, but that's not necessary. Second, so I view the world from the perspective of entrepreneurship, because whereas I don't really know what innovation is, I do know what entrepreneurship is. and I do know its impact. So the second point I'd like to make is that there are tremendous spillovers, what economists call spillovers, of entrepreneurship into society. And the obvious ones are they create jobs. Entrepreneurs, and you've heard the statistics about all the jobs being created by small, young, growing, dynamic companies. So in the States and in Europe and other places that's true. It creates individual wealth. It creates taxes, which are a good thing, a necessary thing. So those are the primary spillover effects, but there are also secondary spillover effects. It creates better governance, and there are lots of examples of that. I think it creates reform. I'll use Israel as an example here. Entrepreneurship in Israel started back in the 50s and 60s, despite what Startup Nation writes about it, started way back when. And in fact, the first company to go public on NASDAQ was in 1972 in Israel. And by the time in the mid-90s that things started rolling, there were about 100 IPOs by that time, by the time they start history. And even then, in the mid-1990s, Israel was largely socialistic. The government and labor had owned huge amounts of the economy. The social norms were anti-wealth. And despite that fact, entrepreneurship was booming, and that fed back actually and created reform. The government policies were, to a large extent, the reform policies actually were chasing the entrepreneurs and not the other way around. And so one of the conclusions of this is that success breeds success. Success has, if you can brute force entrepreneurship, a lot of things will start to happen, and you can create virtuous cycles. So that's the second general comment I'll make. Hopefully there will be some pickup on that. And the third has to do with what the ecosystem is, because we use that word a lot, and very rarely do we have a picture of it. And I've created a very simple picture of the ecosystem. You may not agree that that's simple. You may not agree that that's simple, but you will agree that that's a picture. So I've created a simpler version of it. And I don't know if you can see it. Can you read it back there? No, you can't read it. And that's not because you haven't had your coffee yet, right? Okay, so I'm going to read you the headlines. It starts at the top with leadership. At 12 o'clock is leadership. 1 o'clock is government, culture, success stories, human capital, financial capital, entrepreneurship organizations, education, infrastructure, economic clusters, networks, which means international, global networks, networks of multinationals, support services, and early customers. Those are the 13 elements of the ecosystem. There are other maps of the ecosystem. I'm not claiming that this is the map. I think it's a little bit better than other maps of the ecosystem because it has things in it that others don't have because they treat them as effects and I treat them as causes. So for example, success stories, that's a result, but it's also a cause. In fact, the law of small numbers about entrepreneurship shows that everywhere around the world, if you have one success that occurred randomly, by accident, by brute force, by buying it, by stealing it, whatever, it has a huge feedback effect in terms of creating reputation and inspiring young people and creating the knowledge and so on and so forth. So this law of small numbers is very powerful. So I think it's really important to put success as a cause and not just as a result, success stories. And the need to, I think we were talking about that over a breakfast or dinner, that once you do get a success, you call it bright lights. That was from another.
From Dan and Chapis.
See, you were quoting somebody, and they were probably quoting somebody else, and they were probably quoting me, right? But the successes are incredibly powerful. And another element that's there that usually isn't there is early customers. Early customers. Yeah, entrepreneurs need customers. I know that's surprising to some of you, but without a customer, you will not have a venture. And there are some environments in which large companies are reticent to engage with small companies around the world. In fact, that's prevalent. Boston is unusual, Silicon Valley is unusual in that relatively large companies are willing to talk to entrepreneurs and answer their phone calls or emails. But mostly, that's not the case, and encouraging early customers to engage is really critical. In fact, oftentimes large companies are intentionally or unintentionally predatory towards startups. So these are the elements that when they exist, in the mind of the entrepreneur, there'll be more tendency for the entrepreneur to make the entrepreneurial choice, to say, yeah, I want to give it a try, and having made that choice, to actually be successful, increases the chances of success when you have these things in existence. But there are a few, there's a lot I can say about this. I'm running to the end of my time, but I'll just make a few points, and we can recycle back to some of these during the discussion. The first is that there are no silver bullets. And policymakers tend to focus on one thing. I think there's a reason for that. Marketing messages have to be simple, but it's a mistake to think that there's a silver bullet. So creating better education, which is really important, is not a silver bullet, and creating more capital is not a silver bullet. In fact, some of these things can backfire. So for example, in Puerto Rico, where we've done a project for about a year now, there's a great university called the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, which is so good that because there's very little opportunity for the students who graduate, they leave and come to the mainland. And so they're actually creating a backfiring. They're doing a great job at educating people, and it's creating brain drain. They're so good at it. They call it the best export business of Puerto Rico. So you really have to, did that help you see it, or does that help you go to sleep? Put it back on. I'd prefer him not see it and stay awake than see it and go to sleep. So there's no silver bullets. Secondly, it doesn't make sense in complex social systems and with complex challenges, it doesn't make sense to sit and think, well, what causes what? Because the relationships, the cause and effect relationships are so complex, they're so multi-directional, and in fact, the correlations among any specific cause and effect are so low that it doesn't make sense to think about what causes what. Rather, it makes sense to look at the system as a system. And a fourth implication of this is that every ecosystem is idiosyncratic, is specific to the situation. In fact, because all of these factors are part of the puzzle, for example, you can have a lot of things, but if leadership is bad, if leadership doesn't encourage entrepreneurship, and it may boil down to just a few people, it may not work. It may not work certainly as well. So I think I'll just use this as a way of creating a language for us to continue discussing some of these issues. Obviously, again, there's a lot more to say about it. In fact, some of the more interesting things are still will be unsaid for a while. But that's an opening. And with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Sue to tell us what she's been doing. Thank you.